the Boogeyman of Peshawar. Hush, child. Sleep or Abu Tabela will come. For 2 centuries, Pashtun mothers have whispered one name to silence their children. Abu Tabela, the Faronki, the man who turned the city into a cage. Children grew up believing he was a myth, a monster who lived in the shadows, watching from the minarets, waiting for disobedient children. But he wasn't a myth. He was real. He was the governor. And his name was Paolo Avitabile. This is the story of how one man's brutality became so legendary that it outlived him by 200 years. This is the story of the Boogeyman of Peshawar, forged in fire. Naples, 1791. Born into the chaos of revolution. Paolo Avitabile was born in Naples in 1791, right in the middle of the French Revolutionary Wars. He grew up watching kingdoms fall, armies march, and empires burn. As a young man, he joined the artillery corps of Joachim Murat, Napoleon's brother-in-law and king of Naples. He learned one lesson from those years of cannon fire and blood. Order is not negotiated. It is not debated. It is not won through consent. It is blasted into existence with cannon fire. That was the only language he spoke for the rest of his life. The Mercenary's Road. 1815. Napoleon falls. A soldier without a war needs a new master. When Napoleon fell at Waterloo in 1815, thousands of European soldiers found themselves unemployed. Paolo Avitabile was one of them. So he did what mercenaries do. He went east, looking for wars to fight and masters who would pay. He fought in the Kurdish mountains of Persia, perfecting what he called the art of revenue extraction from resistant tribes. By 1827, he arrived in the Punjab, hired by Maharaja Ranjit Singh of the Sikh Empire. He brought with him a reputation for ruthlessness. And he was about to make it worse. The mask of civilization. Wazirabad, 1829. He built broad streets and symmetrical bazaars. In 1829, Avitabile was appointed governor of Wazirabad. He built broad, straight streets. He created symmetrical bazaars. He organized the city into neat, orderly districts. The British who visited called him a skillful officer, a model administrator, an example of European efficiency bringing civilization to the chaos of the East. But his urban planning was not about beauty. It was about control. He viewed the city not as a home for its people, but as a thing to be tamed, a thing to be disciplined, a thing to be watched. Every straight street was a line of fire. Every open square was a killing ground. The mask of civilization was just that, a mask. The Lawless Gateway. 1837. The legendary General Hari Singh Nalwa falls in battle. In 1837, everything changed. General Hari Singh Nalwa, the legendary Sikh warrior who had held the Khyber Pass for a decade, fell in battle in the Battle of Jamrud. The Sikh grip on Peshawar began to loosen. The Pashtun tribes grew restless. The pass, the gateway between Central Asia and India, was the single most strategic location in the entire empire. Whoever controlled the Khyber Pass controlled trade, controlled armies, controlled history. To hold it, the Sikh Empire didn't need a governor. They needed a terror. They needed someone who would do anything, absolutely anything, to keep the pass secure. They chose Paolo Avitabile, the Iron Sceptre. He was granted unlimited power, an autocrat beyond the reach of the law. When Avitabile rode into Peshawar in 1838, he came with a mandate that no other governor in the empire had been given. Unlimited power. An autocracy beyond the reach of any law, Islamic law, Sikh law, or any moral code. He was given 2 missions. First, secure the Khyber Pass. Second, extract revenue for the Sikh treasury. How he did it was irrelevant. Whether the people loved him or hated him was irrelevant. He himself said it best. I do not seek your love. I demand your fear. And fear is exactly what he delivered. The city ASA cage. He rebuilt the walled city, not for protection, but for containment. Avitabile's first act as governor was to rebuild Peshawar's walled city. But this was not urban renewal for the benefit of the people. This was urban redesign for maximum surveillance and control. He widened the streets, not to improve trade, but to clear lines of fire for his cannons. He demolished buildings that obstructed sight lines. From his headquarters at Gurgatari, in the very center of the city, he could see everything. A panopticon of stone and fear. The people of Peshawar were not citizens. They were inmates. And Avitabile was the warden, sanctuary to Scaffold. The Mohammed Khan Mosque was, and still is, the spiritual heart of Peshawar. It was built in the 1600s as a symbol of faith, a place of refuge, a sanctuary where the people of Peshawar gathered to pray. Avitabile turned its minarets into execution towers. He threw criminals, or people he called criminals, from the top of the minarets, shattering their bodies on the stones below in front of crowds leaving Friday prayers. The symbolism was deliberate. He was signaling that no space, not even the house of worship, was safe from the Farangi. Not even Allah's sanctuary could protect you from Avitabile's wrath. He purposely did this to weaken the faith of the Pashtun Muslims of the city. Industrialized death. He erected permanent gibbets around the city walls. Most governors execute criminals occasionally as punishment for specific crimes. Avitabile made execution a daily routine. He erected permanent gallows around the city walls, dozens of them, visible from every part of Peshawar. Hangings were not hidden. They were public spectacles. Daily entertainment, summary justice, without trial, without appeal, without mercy. He boasted that he would hang people until there was, in his words, a scarcity of brigands and murderers. The message was clear. This is what happens to anyone who resists. This is what happens to anyone who questions. This is what happens to anyone who challenges the Iron Sceptre. He called it a hybrid system. European efficiency meets medieval cruelty. Avitabile liked to describe his governance as a hybrid system, combining European administrative efficiency with what he called traditional methods. In reality, it was a medieval torture regime dressed in bureaucratic language. For lying in court, he cut out tongues. For defiance against his orders, he had people bricked up alive in walls, left to suffocate in the dark. For theft, limbs were severed. For rebellion, families were burned alive. There were no trials. There were no appeals. There was no law. Terror was the only verdict, and Avitabile was the only judge. The silver trap. He demanded taxes in silver, not crops. But Avitabile didn't just break bodies. He broke the entire economic independence of the region. Traditional Pashtun taxation was in kind. Farmers paid a share of their harvest. Avitabile changed the system. He demanded taxes in silver. Not crops. Not goods. Silver. This meant that farmers who had no silver were forced to sell their harvest immediately at whatever price the grain merchants offered. And the grain merchants knew the farmers were desperate. So they paid pennies. The farmers, unable to pay Avitabile's silver tax, were forced into the arms of moneylenders. Debt replaced independence. The people of Peshawar were not just physically imprisoned, they were economically enslaved. The hypocritical ally. The British called his methods savage and un-Christian. But they shook his hand. In 1839, the British launched the First Afghan War. They used Peshawar as their forward base. British officers walked through Avitabile city, past his gallows, past his torture chambers, past the minarets where bodies were thrown, and they were horrified. They wrote letters home calling his methods savage, barbaric, unchristian, unfit for a civilized power. And then they shook his hand. They dined with him. They used his infrastructure. Captain Alexander Burns, one of the most famous British agents of the era, looked at the gallows lining the city walls and called them conclusive proof of civilization. The British condemned Avitabile in private and celebrated him in public. Because his terror served their interests and future plans for Pashtuns, the legacy of lawlessness. 1849, the British took over. They didn't end the terror. They codified it. In 1849, the British annexed the Punjab and took direct control of Peshawar. Avitabile was gone. He had returned to Naples rich and celebrated. The people of Peshawar hoped the nightmare was over. It wasn't. The British didn't end Avitabile's system. They legalized it. In 1872, they passed the Notorious Frontier Crimes Regulation, or famously known as FCR, a law that formalized summary justice, collective punishment, and the absence of trial. Avitabile's iron scepter didn't disappear. It became the law of the land. And it stayed the law for another 75 years, until Pakistan's independence. The governor left. But the system remained, the myth of the lawless frontier. Avitabile labeled them wicked and turbulent to justify his violence. Avitabile understood something that every colonial power after him understood. If you want to justify brutality, you have to dehumanize the people you're brutalizing. So he labeled the Pashtun tribes wicked, turbulent, uncivilized, incapable of being governed by normal law. That label stuck. It created a myth, still alive today, that the frontier cannot be ruled by law, only by force. That the people of the region are inherently violent, inherently lawless, inherently resistant to civilization. A narrative used to justify military operations, drone strikes, and extrajudicial killings for the next 150 years. Avitabile didn't just terrorize Peshawar. He created the ideological framework that justified terrorizing it forever. The ghost remains. Paolo Avitabile returned to Naples, rich and celebrated. He died in a soft bed. Paolo Avitabile left Peshawar in 1842. He returned to Naples a wealthy man. He bought a palace. He was celebrated as a hero. He died in 1850 in a soft bed, surrounded by comfort, honored by the Kingdom of Naples as a loyal servant of the crown. He never faced justice. He never faced accountability in this mortal world. He died content, believing he had civilized the savages. But in Peshawar, his ghost remains. In the shadows of the Mahabbat Khan Mosque, in the narrow alleys of the walled city, and the whispered warnings of mothers to their children, Abu Tabela still walks. The man is dead. But the trauma lives on, and 200 years later, the Boogeyman of Peshawar has still not been laid to rest.